Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, where today I have my coach and very, very good friend, Thom, on the pod. We haven't done one for a while, have we?
No, I can't even remember what we talked about last time, but
Probably PEDs.
maybe they are fun. Yeah, but today we're talking about peak weeks, right? In
Yeah.
time for your competitor series.
Yeah, and touching on PEDs anyway, like what I found from the podcast, and as you know, one of my big motivators is to get more information out about PEDs in a open and honest way for people to, even if they're considering it, to have some actual research-based talks on PEDs. And I found they're so popular because there's not much out there, especially for females, to understand more.
Yeah, and as well, we talk about performance enhancing drugs. As you say, there's not like this huge amount of good information, but also not a lot of personal anecdote being shared.
Yeah.
So the fact that you've been open in your podcast and your journey from natural to enhanced, and actually how that's reflected in your physique from very, very low usage as well, very sustainable usage and stuff like that, to show, okay, well, maybe this is something that I can consider because it can be done in a relatively healthy, sustainable way. I'm not going to become masculinized or X, Y, and Z, which is super cool, right? It's just like there's always this trade-off, and if you actually listen to the podcast and you kind of get a handle on somebody says, yeah, I think that we should give you like loads of testosterone. So, red flag. Okay, this guy probably not got your best interest at heart, at least in terms of you staying feminine.
Yeah, and like we've done, which is relevant to this series anyway, with regards to my stack, with testosterone, femtest, we've actually reduced that rather than ramped it up.
Yeah, like, well, okay, you're on like the top end, like right on the top end. We don't need so much. It's a replacement model for the fact that you had a very low testosterone, probably from competing so much.
Yeah.
And now we're at a stage where we're probably going to transition off it. See
Yeah.
what your blood looks at. So it may not be necessary.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people would think actually you've got to push a load of gear, which we've spoken about on the pod before. And like you've just mentioned, actually it's a pretty small amount that's included in my day to day. And then there's exposures to primo, which is in the timeline, but it's very small periods of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly useful in that contest prep setting and post show to have this kind of like stable hormonal profile throughout, rather than, and we'll talk a little bit about what happens in natural bodybuilding as well. Simply that your sex hormones tank as well as thyroid hormones and so on. It's like very good data on what happens to natural bodybuilders' hormonal profile, and it's not very nice, and it takes a long time to correct. So if you compete regularly, you're sort of chronically in this terrible position.
Yeah, and of course it doesn't always facilitate the best body response, does it?
Well, it's the opposite, of course. The opposite. Post show is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Post show is usually a nightmare if you competed naturally and you got exotically lean.
Yeah, I can attest to that.
Yeah, it's been smoother at this process post show, but much smoother. You've held very good body composition. Actually made somewhat of a physique transformation from post show to now. And there was like these sort of transitional phases where we were looking at your physique and we were like, man, this is like stage worthy. You were getting better. I mean, you were so over dieted by the end of that season.
Yeah.
As we added food and kept your hormonal profile just healthy, the response was fantastic, right? It was a response to food.
And I had this conversation with a friend who's a natural athlete, and she's going to potentially go back to stage one day in a couple of years. And she did a natural prep and it elongated to like 54 weeks with COVID and whatever. And she was like, I'm on the fence whether I go down the PED route. And I explained, for me, it was about actually trying to improve my health markers, like you mentioned, thyroid, get femtest and this type of stuff from a health point of view, and then look at things like primo as short exposures to then help facilitate muscle growth, etc. But I also said that it's so much more of a favorable muscle gain, and I just feel like I've got a completely different physique this post show compared to previous ones.
it'd be interesting to see how that cycles through, over this extended off season. So taking 2 years out of competition,
Yeah.
I mean, you're probably closing in on like 6 month mark now already.
Mm.
You've probably had your first really productive massing phase.
Yeah.
So we've improved, of
Yeah.
course, dramatically right up until this phase. But then this phase has been pretty damn cool to watch.
Yeah. I keep getting those questions. Are you going into wellness? And I'm like, look, when you diet down, it's very different. Like, you can look bigger, but as we know, when you go right down, you look very different. And you may be as well, which is a very good point. You think that you've got muscle, and then you diet down to stage condition, and you're like, okay, maybe I didn't have as much as I thought.
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe a little bottom heavy. Maybe you are sort of slightly over muscled in the lower department.
Mm.
But as you say, once that flattens out, it comes down, and you're like, yeah, no, this is a bikini physique. So you can start off thinking, I'm going to do wellness, but it's better really just to diet down and see what criteria you fit the best. Unless you've been competing for a while, your category. I think for you probably will end up in wellness eventually. I think
The
it's
heavy quads.
yeah. I think you have the genetics for that. It'll just take some time.
It's very important. Actually, I had a conversation with a client, Cause, who's going to compete in the future, and we're doing a photo shoot prep first, and then she's going to we're going to extend it and get a little bit leaner for a holiday, and then have like a reverse out before the holiday, and then go into a growth phase. And I said to her, when we first spoke, you don't really know your category, like you say, till you lean down. Although you've got a bit of an idea, it can be different when you're leaner, and it's like, actually maybe you suit this criteria more, but you don't know till you get those shreds where you're going to fit.
Yeah, I think it's quite cool. You mentioned photo shoot there as well. Like, particularly if it's your first time wanting to compete, maybe do a diet to the point of a photo shoot and just see how you get on with dieting, diet fatigue, your ability to. Because you might find your photo shoot lean, but like just mentally you're cooked. And that's not quite lean enough for stage for the category that fits you best, for example. And you might want to just pull away for a bit and spend a bit more time in the off season before, cracking on again. Because usually as you build muscle, stay a bit leaner and build muscle and stay a bit leaner and build muscle and stuff, you become much closer to striking distance of stage as you accumulate bodybuilding years. You just have more muscle mass on your frame. So sometimes it's maybe not a linear thing that you can say, okay, right, I want to do a show and I'm going to diet straight all the way there to stage condition. You might be able to, you might not. You have to find out. But planning something along the way, like a photo shoot, and it's like, and you do that, and then you can assess, you talk to your coach or, look at yourself honestly and objectively and say, yeah, I'm good to push on. Or do you know what? Actually, I want to move into putting more muscle on. I'm happy with this look. I'm proud of what I achieved, but I know it's not going to be competitive on stage. So really, I'm just wasting time.
Yeah. Yeah. And this comes with honest coaching as well. And what's something that's so good for us as the coaching relationship is that it's always been open and honest. And if you say, I've got to dig more, I'm like, yeah, I've got to dig more. It's not, if you have a coach that you trust, it's not a case of them going, oh, you've got to dig more just for the sake of it. It's that you've got to push. If you're getting lean condition when you're going to stage, it's not just a case of, okay, I'll do a bit of a diet and, I'll see how I go. You've got to push harder. And then, of course, you then have a more effective peak.
I think as well as a coach, just listening to the athlete about the look that they want to present.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be, okay, I want to bring ultimate shreds. That might not be the fullest look, I'm coming big and full. That's probably not going to be the most shredded look. So, and that's cool, as long as you're all on the same page. If your coach is pushing you to be a certain look, and you don't feel that's your best look, then that's probably not going to work out in terms of adherence and buy-in and trust and all of that kind of stuff. So you definitely want to be on the same page, I think. And then you sort of mutually agree.
Yeah.
Okay. This is what I think we need to do this week to get you closer to that aesthetic that you desire.
Yeah. I obviously our conversation into how lean I wanted to get, for me, it was probably a little bit away from the criteria at times, because as we know from the federations I went into, it was very different anyway. But bringing I guess fuller look was more desired, but I just wanted to get shreds this time, and it was like, how much can I push for that? If I'm not going to win, I'm not going to win, and that was a decision I made, you know.
Yeah, and what was cool was in the reverse, we had like +2 weeks. So I thought, well, this is a stage worthy physique.
Yeah.
+4 weeks, but this is probably even a more stage worthy physique. +6 weeks, like,
Mm.
this is probably a perfect stage physique, you know. And you realize how long it can take to fill out an over dieted athlete as well. So we're talking about peak weeks now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think it's a good segue in
Yeah.
is that the athlete needs to get lean
Yeah.
before peak week, and then peak weeks might differ as the athlete progresses across multiple shows in one season.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? I don't particularly think it's a great idea to do just one show.
Okay.
Maybe if you're a first time and you want to try things out, and you have, like, you know, prep fatigue and diet fatigue, that could be appropriate. But I think it's probably better to do like a series of shows and kind of get the most out of being lean. So if you get lean for your first show, and then you're more into like refinement, and you can choose that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, you can do a warm-up show, can't you? Like we did the regional quite far out from the Arnold's. And I always say, like you say, with first timers, maybe it can be slightly different, but I always say if you're that lean and you're not going to visit that place for quite a while, or you're maybe only going to do it once because you want to do that and then maybe don't want to do another prep, it's like it's almost like a missed opportunity to at least go in for a second one.
Yeah, yeah. And also, if you kind of achieve your kind of perfect stage look, which I think you did probably on the third show,
Yeah.
and then you put on this one, like then took you to the British final. So absolutely, we've got to do that.
Yeah.
Um, but even then, like putting food up going into that, you were still dropping. In fact, started dropping more aggressively with more food inputs, which was a really interesting kind of thing to observe.
Yeah.
Um, but essentially, we probably would have had to been a lot more aggressive for you to present the look that you had maybe 4 to 6 weeks post show.
Mm,
I
mm.
think we had like a 2 to 3 week time frame.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was relatively cautious about increasing your food,
Yeah.
but we did increase food. But what happened was you were just burning through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but very difficult to fill out an athlete that's just very, very lean. So,
Mm.
interesting kind of observations, and that's how we might approach a peak week. So we can sort of talk about peak week from a natural and an enhanced standpoint at the same time
Yeah.
when we cover kind of nutrition and training. All
Yeah.
right. So the goal is that you've achieved condition before peak week. Do not think that you're going to magically dry out, right? If you don't have true condition, you are just fat. There's no miraculous water manipulations that are going to make a huge dramatic look. You'll get some great cosmetic changes in a very lean athlete who's depleted.
Yeah.
If an athlete's not very lean, then you're not going to get very favorable cosmetic changes from any kind of manipulations. And you're better off just continuing to diet through peak week,
Yeah.
presenting what you have on stage,
Yeah.
and then continuing on to your next show.
Yeah.
So we did your first peak week and we did everything fairly moderately. It's a little test run.
Yeah.
And no problem. Okay. And the second show, you have a much more structured peak week. And the way that we did the first, I think, 3 was to reduce your carbohydrate intake. I think in the first show, we really didn't do too much. I think we just did one day where we gave you some more carbs before the show.
Yeah.
Second, third one maybe be better examples.
Yeah.
You weren't at that point maybe over dieted. You certainly were lean, but there was a little bit of a room for a depletion at the start of the week.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do any aggressive fat loading, but we did give you some additional fats. We pulled carbs down, and in general, calories were a little bit higher.
Yeah.
We started to superhydrate you, so fluid was tapering up. and then we pulled fats right down, and we hit the carbs from about Thursday for a Saturday show. So it was kind of like an aggressive carb dump on the Thursday, less aggressive dump on the Friday, and on the show day Saturday, it was quite timing dependent. So we got the stage times, we mapped out your meals according to the planned stage times, and of course we reacted on the day to the scheduling getting fucked around. You multiple classes, moving through classes, winning, going on to finals, etc. And this was simply a case of having on hand simple carbohydrates and really not much else.
Yeah. I think people often overcomplicate this actually, and I've peaked obviously under a different coach before, and it is just simple carbs,
But yeah, when we talked about show day foods, so what did you have? We had some rice cakes lying around, we had some jam, we had some Lucasades, and we had some Haribos. And the reason for that is that you're really not gonna generate any cosmetic change from like anything other than glucose when you get into fairly close proximity to your stage time. Even I think one night before, we were like 7 meals in or something, 500 or 600 carbs. And I took that last look at you and I sent you off to eat a pack of Haribo before bed.
I was like, bloody hell, sitting in the hotel room. Oh my God.
So there's a certain reactive element with the coaching eye or your own eye about the look that you want to present. I think people look forward to peak week in a weird emotional way sometimes.
I do, yeah.
They're like having cookies the day before on the day of show, or these kind of like things that don't really digest well, they've not had in their diet. The burger fries approach.
The Five Guys approach.
Burger fries and a diazide. Okay, everybody's getting different, but I find this to be like a very hit and miss. Like that might generate a great look, and you could even trial it, but the body changes over the course of prep. I've been in prep and I've had a cheat meal and woken up the next day and I look dry and I'm like vascular. I'm like, oh, fantastic. The next week I look shit. My stomach's blown out. My tolerance for inflammatory foods has changed because my systemic stress is elevated. So, okay, how are we going to approach a peak week generally? General rules. What do we want to do is remove stress as far as possible and promote sleep quality as far as possible. So that's going to involve pulling out any stimulants that's not going to cause too much stress. If you're on 1,000 milligrams of caffeine and I go, no caffeine, right? That's going to fuck you up.
Yes, yeah.
We kept caffeine managed and monitored throughout the course of your prep so that we could use it when you did start to get fatigued. But it never became like a crutch. Fluids, we definitely want to drive diuresis high. We definitely don't want to combine a whole bunch of fluids with like your kind of like show day manipulations, should we say. We still want diuresis to kind of be ticking over, so I'm not really a fan of pulling out fluids entirely.
Same.
I also don't think that fluids need to be aggressively high for the whole of prep or for the entirety of peak week, and I don't think they need to be super aggressive either, because at some point you'll demineralize, right? You're going to wash out all of the kind of sodium, potassium, like the things that are going to make the muscles pop and help to produce glycogen muscles and so on. So do I want the athlete in a state of hyperdiuresis where they're pissing every 20 minutes and chronically thirsty? No, that's a good indicator that the mineral balance is fucked. So then you'd be looking at like sodium manipulations just to kind of get them hydrated somehow.
It's interesting actually. So many people still now, like majority of people that I speak to that don't really know about bodybuilding, and they always say, oh, do you have to do that thing where you dehydrate for 48 hours before a show? And I'm like, actually there's been quite a lot of research and evidence that that's not as needed. Still people do it, of course, but generally you don't need to dehydrate before a show.
No. Well, another thing is that dehydration is going to elicit fluid retention, right?
Mm.
So you can probably get away with it if you haven't got any fat stores to store fluid in,
Mm.
but it's still going to be a flatter look. So, okay, what's going to fill you out are carbohydrates. How are those carbohydrates going to get stored? Well, one one molecule of carbohydrate is stored as one molecule of glycogen. The glycogen is carbohydrate plus 3 molecules of water, right?
Yeah.
This weighs 1 gram, this weighs 4. So you need the fluids with the carbohydrates. So doing a carb load with no fluids isn't going to work very well.
Well, it's going to make you feel like shit as well.
Yeah, you digest, or you'll end up flat with a blown out gut.
Yeah.
Probably. Okay, and then we probably need sodium,
Yeah.
probably in line with the carbohydrate and fluid intake. So, okay, maybe we're carb loading from 3 days out or 2 days out, but where you start, that's probably your highest day. Carbs,
Mm-hmm.
fluids will be appropriately high, and sodium will be appropriately high. Now, the next day, because we want to drive diuresis, carbohydrates are reduced, probably. Maybe not if the athlete is still flat,
Yeah.
but carbohydrates reduced slightly, sodium's reduced slightly, fluids increased slightly.
Yeah.
All right. So day one could be 6 liters of water with 600 grams of carbs and 12 grams of salt.
Yeah.
Day two, 400 grams of carbs with 7 liters of water and maybe aggressively drop the salt to 8 grams.
Yeah.
Okay. And day three could just be a simple top up 200 grams of carbs, 8 liters of water, sodium down at 4 grams. It's still in there.
Yeah.
And then we get to show day. So you wake up in the morning, nice and dry. And this is where we'll probably restrict fluids.
Yeah.
So 250 ml of fluid per meal. As you know, I like to use some simple carbs in that fluid. So your body recognizes glucose, dextrose very easily. So simple, Lucozade, no problem. It's got some electrolytes in there. And just kind of maintain that kind of fullness just enough. But your body's used to getting a lot of water, so it's continuing to dry out through stage day. And if your stage time gets really, really late, then you might actually reevaluate. So with athletes on stage late, I'm probably going to give them more fluids for longer and then reduce it maybe 3 to 4 hours before they go on stage.
Which is where you start to think about preparation for show day, of course. And I think that sometimes, particularly as a first timer, you wouldn't realize how late shows can run on.
They can go very late. So that can sort of require sort of management on the day. But most of the shows now run pretty smooth, pretty close to their timeline. So you get your time slots. Yeah, you'll have a reasonable idea of when you're going on stage. You probably want to have your contingencies. We have our suitcase full of rice cakes, jam, Haribo, Lucozade.
Peanut butter in case.
Yeah, I mean, we used my food on one occasion just because we were still going, and we need some fats. Where are the fats lying around? We're out of fats. Okay, well, we've got some avocado, and we had some chicken lying around. So you probably didn't really need chicken, but like fucking hungry. So come on, it's okay.
I talk about that all the time. Like I tagged you in the story the other day. It's like that tasted one of the best palate experiences I'd had in so long. And like you say, it's just rice cakes with guacamole and some chicken. But I was like, I think there's something wrong with me. This tastes bloody delicious.
Okay. So in terms of removing stress, we're going to be pulling out any fat burning agents that cause systemic stress, including with natural bodybuilding, something like your himbean, maybe tapering down caffeine a little if it doesn't cause additional stress to the athlete. In enhanced athletes, that'd be removal of something like clenbuterol.
Yeah.
Okay. So cardio, we'd remove all inflammatory cardio. So that's the gym-based stuff. So they just walk around. Ideally, you're going to taper steps down over the course of the week. Some people's lifestyles don't support that, but ideally, we're going to reduce activity, probably going to increase the amount of posing that they do, pull heavy-duty training sessions, certainly pulling lower sessions because they're so inflammatory to the legs. It's very hard for them to show detail. And we see this in deloads as well. You know, an athlete will be, you know, checking in 4 to 6 weeks into a hard mesocycle, and their legs won't look overly defined. They'll deload. They'll, you know, check back in a week later or something like that, and their quads will be detailed again. Yeah. Or an acute observation would be at the start of your leg session, you can see definition in your quads. By the end of the leg session, they're so pumped, there is no definition. They're super inflamed and damaged. So we want to protect all of that stuff. So that's why in peak week, generally, you just train light.
Yeah. And even like for a bit of fun, obviously you're pretty fucked, but also it's relevant to note that you're not gonna, if you go to the gym and try and push like you normally would, that's not going to help you look better for stage. And I think sometimes as bodybuilders, we love training, we want to perform, we think that always facilitates looking better, but actually pulling that out, like you say, it brings a better physique than trying to train like a beast on peak week.
Yeah, similarly, by this point, we're fairly married to our routine and our habits, and some people can be quite unwilling to give that up. We even see it in general population. You need a rest. You need a rest. I can't do deloads. I can't take time off. Mentally, it's too hard. So yeah, full rest can be hard, but sometimes it's necessary for progress. And in peak week, all we want to do is make sure that nutrient partitioning is effective. So taking advantage of the fact that there are now nutrients as food in the body, and we know that training increases blood flow to the muscle, increases the saturation of the muscle of whatever's in the bloodstream. So this should all be good stuff. So, okay, so on a simplistic level, we probably look at a low carb start to the week, potentially with higher non-inflammatory fats, avocados, peanut butter, coconut oil for the intramuscular triglycerides are super effective, maybe some whole eggs, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then in order to really assimilate the huge amount of carbs that are going to be needed to go in later in the week, we really don't want a whole bunch of fats slowing down the digestion. So we've done that. We've filled up intramuscular fat stores. For those of you that are kind of new to this, your muscles need to be filled with fat and carbohydrate and salt and water. These are the fundamentals. If you put all of your fats in with your carbohydrates, it's going to be very hard for you to process the carbohydrates quickly enough, right? We've got a finite time window, so we can break that down. And in athletes that haven't dropped super low carb, they haven't had to, they've retained pretty good fullness going into peak week, then you can probably pull carbs down a bit just to increase sensitivity. Some athletes will have been on very low carbs anyway. You don't need to pull them down further. You know, 200 grams might be enough to keep depleting you. So do you want your athlete to be more depleted in those first couple of days or not? Yeah. It's an assessment that you want to make. A large male, if you aggressively deplete them, then you might not be able to fill them out. In a small female, the carbohydrate manipulations could be less dramatic. In your case, you know, 55 kg roughly was your average stage weight, and we were still smacking home sort of 600 to 700 carbs, 400 to 500 carbs, 300 to 400 carbs, and then on show day, but we even lose track. We're planning like 400, and then we probably put in another 400.
Yeah, we were like, we're probably touching on 900 by now. Yeah. You do this. The undercurrent there is as well, which we have touched on, is when you get pretty peeled, and I've spoken about this on a pod before with Charlie who came on, when you get really lean, it's pretty hard to fuck it up. Like, you can still fuck it up, okay, but it's a very different physique when you're shredded compared to, like you mentioned at the start, you're still a bit fat.
But I think the two things that will fuck up a shredded physique are junk foods and diuretics.
Yeah. Ultimately, stress on the digestive or the body.
Yeah, and I mean, dumping in a fucking calorie dense meal full of inflammatory fats that's going to take ages to digest the night before a show or the morning of a show, full English breakfast.
I do wonder because a lot of that's this sort of historic thing, isn't it? Like the do you have to dehydrate, and that still hangs around. And so many people say again, like, do you have a Five Guys or whatever the night before? And every peak, I've never wanted to do that because I want to have the digestible foods. I want to stick to plan. I want to measure it out. I want to know what my macros are. I've never done it that way, and it just blows my mind that that's even a method, to be honest.
It's almost like having your treat,
Yeah.
your reward for dieting before you go on stage. And so what's going to happen is we put in a lump of calorie dense crap. It's inflammatory, digests super slowly, and let's chuck in a diuretic with that. So okay, so what's going to happen is we're going to pull fluid out of the muscles, right? So like, where else is it going to come from? So we're going to pull fluid out of the muscles before they've filled up.
Yeah.
And we're going to have food sitting in the GI when we need the waste to be small.
And also, you're promoting potentially the low energy levels, feeling very lethargic, all of the things that you don't want on show day.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, everyone's response is different. Everyone's response is different. And if you've got a tried and tested formula that works for you that's not aligned with this is absolutely fine. But as a general rule of how you're going to approach peak week, it's very hard to fuck it up if you keep your foods high, your salt high, and you eat whole foods.
Yeah. And like you say, the digestive tract, being able to have foods that you know you can tolerate. Actually, when I had Joe on the pod talking about peaking strategies before, and I've always cut out sweeteners and things on the whole of peak week. And he was like, if you tolerate them okay, actually they're all right. And we actually had conversations about what sweeteners I could have in my coffee and whatever. But again, you don't maybe have to restrict as much as you'd think.
Yeah, so something like alcohol polyols, xylitol and erythritol being the sort of common ones, maybe sorbitol, they probably will cause some digestive distress, particularly in high volumes, right? But sucralose is generally incredibly well tolerated, so we don't really need to worry too much about the use of something like sucralose. So okay, what sweeteners are you using? What's in your sauces, low calorie salt, and all this kind of stuff. Sucralose base, we'd say, yeah, it's called stays in. If it's an alcohol polyol base, then we'd say let's not have that in peak week. Let's just sort of put that to one side for now, just to make sure that we're as digestion stress free as possible. Sort of playing it safe. Instead of sweeteners, it's just a specific type of sweetener that we know, scientifically speaking, is incredibly well tolerated in the majority of the population. So that's cool. I mean, you might have an athlete that's got an intolerance specifically to a certain sweetener. They should tell you that in advance, and they shouldn't be having it anyway.
Yeah, it's this is where you learn in prep as well, isn't it? We were talking so much during the whole of prep, and it's trying to fine tune your diet even before you prep, ideally, which is what we did. But if you start with a coach and you're going straight into a prep, it's about working out foods that are digestible for you and then utilizing those strategies in a peak rather than fucking around in an ideal world.
You spent a lot of time with virtually no carbs.
Yeah.
But now we have to give you carbs. So what carbs do we give you? Well, we know that white rice is going to work.
Yeah, easy.
Going to be absolutely fine. We also included some fiber dense carbs for gastric motility.
Yeah.
We still had to include a laxative before
Yeah,
show. This is very common, and effective as well. You just have to be aware that they can also like leave you a little bit flat sometimes. So just something to factor in, I suppose, in the expected look by when they wake up the next morning. So if they go to bed looking a little bit spilled, with fluid still nice and high, and a laxative or something, you pretty much expect them to wake up bang on point. And maintaining that look or refining that look throughout the day is a little bit more by eye. But the rule would be you don't really need protein, you don't really need fat, and glucose and rice are going to digest pretty well. Maybe honey as well if you want. Fructose will replenish liver glycogen if they are a bit depleted.
And with laxatives as well, where you spoke about that, I use that as a natural and an assisted athlete, because for me, both ends of the spectrum, I have problems with. You don't go to the toilet for maybe 3 or 4 days, and that does become fairly normal from my own personal experience. But I know people, even lifestyle clients that diet get problems with digestion.
Okay. So we're pulling stress from stimulants, fat burners, and training and heavy duty cardio. Cool. We're loading up with carbohydrates and fluids. We're looking to elicit a full, dry look. In enhanced competitors, that's about as much as you will want to do. There are natural diuretics out there. Heat Max is a good sort of combined one from Strong Sports. It's a really good go-to. But overuse of those will potentially flatten you out as well. So it's not like a natural diuretic is like totally safe. There's no risk of flattening. You can use small amounts of diuretics as well in an athlete to drive additional diuresis. I think it's important then that you are keeping fluids in, to be honest, because you're forcing fluid out. You need fluid to be coming in. It doesn't need to be that much. So, and then also correcting a athlete who's had fluids in on show day versus an athlete who's not had fluids for 2 days. This swing is catastrophic usually. So we're talking like heavy duty cankles and fluid retention and stuff like that. It can take as much as a week to wash off, and that's if we stay on point with the diet, keep the fluids high. Whereas
isn't always the case in post show.
Keep fluids in on show day, and I think we made a priority of it post show. Right, these are your fluids going in immediately post show. We're going to hold off on the sort of the off plan meal. The off plan meal had some rules to it to some degree, and you didn't really have any issues with fluid retention or spilling over or anything like that. We sort of back on point the next day and off we go.
Yeah.
I think maybe we spent one of those weeks as a diet break. You still ate clean. No issues with fluid retention, which is a huge part of the discomfort in a rebound.
Yeah, it's horrible when you get that. And also when you talk about the post-show period and what you do for your post-show meal and whatever that is, it's trying to weigh up what outcome you want from that period. And that's why it was so important that we spoke about it quite a lot as to what I wanted to feel like, after the show and that week leaning into then having a diet break and going on holiday and things. Where did I want to see that go, and what input did you have? What input did I have to make it a success and not just feel like shit?
Yeah, well, you learn those eating behaviors in your off season with me. Short as it was, all we did was focus on food behaviors and building a relationship with food, so you understand what feeding your body really felt like. So when we say, okay, now it's time to go away and feed your body, you just put in loads of good stuff.
I just want good stuff.
Your physique just got better. Your physique just got better. Go and put a load of crap stuff in. Your physique will look horrendous really quickly, and you put yourself in a terrible position to actually make the most out of an off season.
Yeah, but you also feel fucking shit. You either feel shit as in energy and everything else, or you also feel that I fucked it up, and then you can go different ways. But I know a lot of competitors that then struggle with binge type behavior, with self-restriction, all of those cycles that are very common in our sport, because it can lead to these food pathologies. And I've, like you said, when we started working together, I had food pathologies, and I'm happy to be open about that. I did have things I needed to work on.
Yeah, most people will. I mean, to be honest with you, still carry some food pathologies with us, or we have many little ones. It's just whether they're detrimental or not. Like I find mayonnaise repellent.
Yeah, I do. But light mayonnaise, all right.
Can't get my head around mayonnaise, right? So little things that we carry around with us, but these ones that kind of like, let's say, should be aware of hoarding of junk foods. That's a big red flag. If you really focus on in the off season eating for training performance, as opposed to I'm in the off season, I can eat whatever I want. You should have this kind of like base of really just whole foods.
Yeah, yeah.
So we got loads of really good whole foods going in all the time. Yes, they've come down significantly as we approach the show, but that kind of eating pattern should just naturally expand back out. All right. Is bodybuilding eating for performance restrictive? Yes, to some degree. Absolutely. A box of Findus crispy pancakes will not consistently yield the best training performance over steak, rice, avocado, whatever.
And also on that note, when you think about your food selection and trying to keep it X amount percentage clean, as it were, in inverted commas, and still incorporating certain foods in the off season or meals out and experiences and things like this, which is what we fine tuned together, and actually choosing to have nicer foods. And basically my whole day is around the training performance window, and then when I do have my additional calories as my off-plan foods, I don't tend to, sometimes I have a burger or whatever, but I love like going for a meal and having a grilled chicken breast and loads of different veggies that I maybe wouldn't have at home.
I mean, you can go to a quality restaurant and enjoy a quality meal, right? There's something wrong if your off-plan meal is sit at home, order in a couple of large pizzas, a load of ice cream, and just stuff yourself. I mean, where was the experience?
Yes.
Beyond the first slice?
Yeah.
Where was the social element? And where's the quality as well? So I don't get to go out for a Chateaubriand and sweet potato fries and peppercorn sauce, like very often. It's not like a typical part of my bodybuilding meal. But I guarantee you, I'm going to go out and enjoy that meal. I'm going to wake up the next day, my digestion's going to be absolutely on point. I've had some additional calories. It's all quality. It's going to lead to great training performance. Did I have more protein than I need? Probably. Did I have more fat than I need? Yes. Was it inflammatory? Probably not. Not sufficiently. Was it an enjoyable meal? Did I have a great experience? Did my stomach hurt afterwards? No. Did I need a nap in the restaurant? Did I need to get a cab home because I can't walk it off? This is a good thing to measure. Is like, can you walk it off?
Yeah.
Sushi is normally a good one. You have a good amount of sushi and feel full, and then you go for a walk, and you're like, oh, I feel okay. I don't want to eat, but I don't have stomach distension and pain.
And also, you touched on there about the quality of food. Like, you can still incorporate different foods, and it's, for me, I find looking at a restaurant before, seeing some reviews, seeing what sort of grade meat they use, things like this. Like, there's nothing wrong with doing a bit of research and actually going somewhere that's a bit nicer than going down to a Mackie D's. Do you know what I mean? If you're going to have a burger, you can go in with a nice experience, better foods, and it sits so much better.
Yeah. So can you eat out and have social experiences on prep and in the off season while still eating for training performance and eating for physique goals? Absolutely. If you get in a pattern of elevating junk food to sort of the highest level of reward, then you're putting yourself in a shitty position. So just as you described, going out for a high quality restaurant meal could be your highest level of reward. It also includes social time. And right down here, the lowest level of reward or borderline punishment would be McDonald's, right? So
Yeah, it's not my vibe.
if I have to eat McDonald's, I feel like I'm being punished. All right. If I get to eat steak and peppercorn sauce and sweet potato fries, it's a reward. Fantastic. You get that the wrong way around, then you'll probably be in trouble post show. Now, we obviously gave a good sort of general overview of how peak weeks generally get approached. It's hard to attach numbers on them, but in general, there's going to be something of a depletion stage, something of a carb loading phase. We're going to push up fluids, things like sodium, creatine, magnesium, caffeine. These all need to be managed and leveraged with good understanding. And then in enhanced athletes, this is also where we might apply some cosmetic drugs. So they can use Cialis on show day for a pump. Something like Anavar is a good cosmetic tool, or Winstrol as well. So maybe not so much, I probably wouldn't expose a female to Winstrol regardless. But, you know, acute, if they don't typically use Anavar or anything like that, then, you know, an acute exposure to Anavar will yield a little bit more of a pop, just maybe on show day, for example. So there's some little bits of cosmetic benefits, but the difference fundamentally between dieting enhanced and dieting naturally is that one has their hormonal profile tank, the other one can keep their hormonal profile stable or elevated or going up.
Mm-hmm.
These are typical peak weeks. Now let's talk about an athlete who's coming towards the end of a longer prep season, just to wrap things up. And this is where you're going to move into maybe more linear loading. All right. We're looking at the athlete's weight, we're looking at their look, and they probably are going to have some proportion of fats, a fairly high serving of carbohydrates, a digestible, maybe slightly lower serving of protein than typical. And they might do that every day up until the point where you're like, they look nice and full, or they look slightly spilled, I'm going to taper it back. Yeah. All right. When they're looking nice and full, and you've got their weight stabilized and maintained, and you're happy with the look, and that's just called linear loading. And that's really, really straightforward and simple to do if the athlete is very depleted and extremely lean. Yeah. This is going to be sort of closer to the end. So take an athlete who's extremely lean and extremely depleted and deplete them further. There's no benefit. You leave yourself only with 2 to 3 days to load carbohydrates when really they need 10.
Yeah.
All right. So there are obviously some slightly different strategies. Some people will load carbs at the start of the week.
Yeah.
Okay. That's probably going to leave you less sensitive to carbs towards the end of the week and more prone to spilling over. It's very, very difficult to spill a lean athlete in 1 to 2 days.
Yeah. Also, I found when I front loaded before in the week, I tried it years ago and I didn't like it. It didn't feel good. And what I found is what you sort of touched on there is that actually when I do it close to the show, I find that I've got a better energy on show day. My physique looks better. I feel better. You know, digging it down for the first 2-3 days and continuing your deficit and then peaking, I find lends itself much better to me.
Yeah. And even if you do want to reduce carbohydrates at the start of the week to make sure you're super sensitive, you don't really need to be in a calorie deficit anymore. So that is a good opportunity to get the fats in early.
Yeah, which is what we've done.
They're not going to get depleted. We didn't really push your fats very high, to be honest.
A little bit. I always talk about when you gave me 50 grams of peanut butter, however, and how excited I was. And I think I sent you 3 voice notes saying, can I just confirm? Did you say 50 grams over the day?
Like 25 grams of fat, though. Like,
yeah, it's not that much. But
large male might require 200, you know.
Yeah.
So we were definitely on the cautious side with that.
Yeah.
So just to kind of acknowledge that in general, over the course of the season, all your different peak weeks and everything like that, your food sources need to stay digestible, things that you're used to, or that you know will be non-inflammatory. Okay, you didn't have rice for 6 weeks. I still know that white rice is going to digest just fine. We did not have a single instance of digestive distress on show day, despite the fact that we were piling a ton of food into you. So it was the food choices were digestible. So this is really important. Fluids should be relatively high throughout prep. They should be pushed higher towards the end of peak week. And then you should pull them for show day when diuresis is super high. But I personally don't believe in pulling fluids out completely. And I think it yields a better post-show period if you do that. All right. Diuretics will not make you look peeled if you're fat. Diuretics will probably not make you look better if you're peeled. It's a knowledgeable eye, with some caveats that minerals and fluids remain in. Diuretics could be maybe deployed if a show day involves like multiple appearances. For example, so a small amount of a diuretic that's going to stay in the system for maybe 12 hours. And bearing in mind, diuretics kind of drive off sodium and potassium typically. So you probably want to have some of those in, and you want to have some fluids additionally to keep pushing things through. And diuretics shouldn't be doing everything. And then the final thing to note is that if you pull fluids before you put in carbohydrates, this will not yield a favorable response. You need water. So getting the carbohydrates in their sort of bulk 2 to 3 days before show, depending on the size of the athlete, will allow you to get the fluids, the salt and the carbohydrates in, digested and converted to glycogen. It can take like up to 48 hours. So, okay, we need time to do that. We need to top you up, and we need to top you up again. We need to maintain you on show day. Simple in terms of an idea. But in reality, each athlete's going to be unique. Some flatten off fast. Some look pretty damn full, even though they're on really low carbs.
Also, it's so relevant. Well, like you said there about if you're not dieted down enough, nothing's really going to correct that, especially if you're suddenly in peak week and you're not in the condition you need to be. Nothing miraculous is going to help that, including things like laxatives and whatever else. And I think people marry themselves to a date sometimes, and perhaps they need to be a bit more open-minded and go, actually, I've still got another 4-6 weeks of dieting to actually bring condition.
So we get lean, we continue to eat clean, we continue to stay hydrated, we continue to stay mineralized. This will produce a very good stage look in its own right. Subtle manipulations in an enhanced athlete might be use of a vasodilator like Cialis. Equally, you could use a pump product as long as the athlete's used the pump product before stage. A cosmetic oral like Anavar could be used. You could also maybe in an athlete deploy maybe a male athlete might deploy a low dose of trenbolone in that final week, something like that. Just bearing in mind it is a systemic stressor, it will affect sleep quality. So a very low dose, like 50 milligrams, kind of stay below that threshold of stressing the physique further. Not something I typically do. And then it's sort of keeping it that simple, really. Overthinking it, doing radical things, dehydrating aggressively, banging in junk food meals, last minute loading
causing stress. Like minimize stress. This is what I say to people, it's about trying to look at potential stressors, timeline in your week before you compete. You've put like maybe 8 to 10 months into a prep, and then have a stressful peak week, and for that to fuck your physique is just crazy. You've got to do what you can to be able to manage your stress heavily that week. Sleep, like you say, prioritizing that. And actually, before we wrap up, something that we use the day before a show is having a sleep aid to try and, because sleep's pretty fucked, it helps to get a good night's sleep before the show as well. So that's something that could be considered.
Yeah, I mean, throughout prep, you leverage melatonin. You leveraged an antihistamine that makes you extremely drowsy. Those did promote better sleep quality than you would have had otherwise.
for
All
sure.
right. Okay, this does not replace good sleep hygiene.
Yeah.
Best possible scenario, but let's be realistic about the world we live in. And our modern environment is not set up for the best possible sleep hygiene anyway. So, okay, we have these more natural supplements as well. And then full exposure, I gave you a Valium the night before
Which is
each of your
delightful.
competitions. Like, you had a Valium and a laxative. You slept like a baby. You were stress free, and you had a big poo.
It was bloody delightful. And I didn't even know I went to the toilet. You had to ask Matt, and he was like, yeah, she did. Fucking hell.
And all over the toilet seat.
But like it is, you don't have quality sleep in a fucking prep anyway. Like, well, I don't know many people that do. I never have. So that Valium, like, it just took the edge off and gave me a bit of deep sleep to then, in essence, everything is geared towards that day. And it's when everything comes together. So that good night's sleep is just massive when it comes to show day. You think, oh, I don't feel so bad.
Yeah. And you know where maybe historically people might have had like a small amount of alcohol. This isn't really the best possible idea, but I do understand that it's relaxing you to some degree, and that's some kind of a benefit. But there's a lot of negatives associated. So that wasn't the route that we went down.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So we used a Valium. So yeah, we probably covered most of the sort of general rules around peak week. It's probably something we could revisit and break down in a sort of like an example peak week.
Yeah.
So we take the lean athletes for their first peak, and we'll give them a certain weight. We can attach numbers, and we can really break that down for enhanced and for natural. But I think as a general overview, that's a pretty good idea for everybody of how they should be thinking about their peak week, how they should be behaving their off season, how they should be behaving post show, in order to get the most favorable physique, so the look on stage, but also to not have an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, because always my message to anyone looking to compete, anyone that is competing, is looking to compete in the future, is finding out your reasons for wanting to do this. And if your reasons aren't aligning with wanting to do basically what you've just outlined there in regards to food to match your physique and food behaviors, training performance, all of these things, that's the fundamentals of a good bodybuilder. So if you're not geared towards that, then maybe it isn't the sport for you. And you know, there's other things that you could maybe delve into. So I think that's a very good summary.
Yeah. And I'll end it on one thing as an observation. You know, I've prepped a few people, and someone like yourself, whose why is to win, to present their best possible form of their physique, has incredible adherence. Somebody who's looking for significance and validation, but by being a bodybuilder, by getting on stage, by competing, and be honest with yourself about what's driving you, because you can leverage significance and validation. But if you don't want to be the best on that day, like if your drive to win, if you don't want to present your best possible physique, you're probably going to be the one that cheats on your diet.
Yeah, yeah.
If you're already cheating on your diet now when you're in prep, then have a good hard look at your reasons why, because it's probably just going to be a traumatic experience. I guarantee you that once you step on stage, either don't look your best or you do look your best, but the cost was very attritional. It's not that big a reward if you know your goal wasn't as we described, to present your best possible physique or to win, you know, to be proud, right? What you can expect from a successful prep is to feel proud of your accomplishment. You will not feel validated or more significant. Maybe if you win the Arnold Classic or the Olympia, you're going to feel more significant. You might feel validated if you reach the pinnacle of your profession. But in general, for an amateur bodybuilding show, it's not going to make you feel happy.
No, and also trying to tart things up in a prep as we did. You mentioned there, like we did 13 weeks in the end of 4 meals, 50 grams of carbs, 20 grams of fat, and my 200 protein. I didn't try and fuck around and try and spice it up. I ate the same food every day because I wanted to win. I wanted to bring my best. And like you say there, if you want to do that, if you're in this sport for the right reasons, just fucking do it. Just get on with it. Listen to your coach and prep like a boss.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone who's relentless, with will to win, it will be able to do a prep. Absolutely. You might not be built that way, and that's also okay.
Yeah, it's but like you say, the big point there, be honest with yourself and do it for the right reasons.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for your time today, my friend. Big Tom is back on the pod.
always a pleasure. And I do say that the Beyond Condition podcast is the best bodybuilding podcast in terms of education and information. So I highly recommend, if this is your first listen, go back. There's so many great episodes. I listen to them every week. So
thank you.
One of my favorite things. So thank you for having me on.
And I will see you tomorrow for check-in.
Yes, you will.
See you later.